The Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake. Book 1. Titus Groan. Inklings of Glory. "I want some tea," said Clarice, and leading the way she performed the miraculous journey through the room once more, Steerpike at her heels like a shadow, and Cora taking an alternative path. Once more in the comparatively sane living-room where the tapers had been lit by the old woman, they sat before the fire, and Steerpike asked if he might smoke. Cora and Clarice, after glancing at each other, nodded slowly, and Steerpike filled his pipe and lit it with a small red coal. Clarice had pulled at a bell rope that hung by the wall, and now, as they sat in a semicircle about the blaze, Steerpike in the centre chair, a door opened to their right, and an old, dark-skinned lady with very short legs and bushy eyebrows entered the room. "Tea, I suppose," she said in a subterranean voice that seemed to have worked its way up from somewhere in the room beneath them. She then caught sight of Steerpike and wiped her unpleasant nose with the back of her hand before retiring and closing the door behind her like an explosion. The embroideries flapped outwards in the draught this occasioned, and sank again limply against the walls. "This is too much," said Steerpike. "How can you bear it?" "Bear what?" said Clarice. "Do you mean, your ladyships, that you have become used to being treated in this off-hand and insolent manner? Do you not mind whether your natural and hereditary dignities are flouted and abused? When an old commoner slams the doors upon you and speaks to you as though you were on her own degraded level? How can the grown blood that courses so proudly and in such an undiluted stream through your veins remain so quiet? Why, in its purple wrath, is it not boiling at this moment?" He paused a moment and leant further forward. "Your birds have been stolen by Gertrude, the wife of your brother. Your labour of love among the roots, which but for that woman would now be bearing fruit, is a fiasco. Even your tree is forgotten. I had not heard of it. Why had I not heard of it? Because you and all you possess have been put aside, forgotten, neglected. There are few enough of your noble and ancient family in Gormenghast to carry on the immemorial rights, and yet you two, who could uphold them more scrupulously than any, are slighted at every turn." The twins were staring at him very hard. As he paused, they turned their eyes to one another. His words, though sometimes a little too swift for them, communicated nevertheless their subversive gist. Here, from the mouth of a stranger, their old sores and grievances were being aired and formulated. The old lady with the short legs returned with a tray which she set before them with a minimum of deference. Then, inelegantly waddling away, she turned at the door and stared again at their visitor, wiping, as before, the back of her large hand across her nose. When she had finally disappeared, Steerpike leaned forward, and turning to Cora and Clarice in turn, and fixing them with close and concentrated eyes, he said, "Do you believe in honour? Your ladyships, answer me. Do you believe in honour?" They nodded mechanically. "Do you believe it should go unchecked? That it should flourish without any retribution?" Clarice, who had rather lost track of the last question, waited until he saw Cora shaking her head before she followed suit. "In other words," said Steerpike, "you think that something must be done, something to crush this tyranny." They nodded their heads again, and Clarice could not help feeling a little satisfied that she had so far made no mistake with her shakes and nods. "Have you any ideas?" said Steerpike. "Have you any plans to suggest?" They shook their heads at once. "In that case," said Steerpike, stretching his legs out before him and crossing his ankles, "may I make a suggestion, your ladyships? Again, most flatteringly, he faced each one in turn to obtain her consent. One after the other they nodded heavily, sitting bolt upright in their chairs. Meanwhile, the tea and the scones were getting cold, but they had all three forgotten them. Steerpike got up and stood with his back to the fire so that he might observe them both at the same time. "Your gracious ladyships," he began, "I have received information which is of the highest moment. It is information which hinges upon the unsavoury topic with which we have been forced to deal. I beg your undivided concentration, but I will first of all ask you a question. Who has the undisputed control over Gormenghast? Who is it who, having this authority, makes no use of it, but allows the great traditions of the castle to drift, forgetting that even his own sisters are of his blood and lineage, and are entitled to homage and, shall I say it? Yes, to adulation too? Who is that man?" "Gertrude," they replied. "Come, come," said Steerpike, raising his eyebrows. "Who is it who forgets even his own sisters? Who is it, your ladyships?" "Sepulchrave," echoed Clarice. They had become agitated and excited by now, although they did not show it, and had lost control over what little circumspection they had ever possessed. Every word that Steerpike uttered they swallowed whole. "Lord Sepulchrave," said Steerpike. After a pause, he continued, "If it were not that you are his sisters and of the family, how could I dare to speak in this way of the Lord of Gormenghast? But it is my duty to be honest. Lady Gertrude has slighted you, but who should make amends? Who has the final power but your brother? In my efforts to re-establish you and to make this south wing once again alive with your servants, it must be remembered that it is your selfish brother who must be reckoned with." "He is selfish, you know," said Clarice. "Of course he is," said Cora. "Thoroughly selfish. What shall we do? Tell us, tell us." "In all battles, whether of wits or of war," said Steerpike, "the first thing to do is to take the initiative and to strike hard." "Yes," said Cora, who had reached the edge of the chair and was stroking her smooth, heliotrope knees in quick, continual movements which Clarice emulated. "One must choose where to strike," said Steerpike, "and it is obvious that to strike at the most vulnerable nerve centre of the opponent is the shrewdest preliminary measure. But there must be no half-heartedness. It is all or nothing." "All or nothing," echoed Clarice. "And now you must tell me, dear ladies, what is your brother's main interest?" They went on smoothing their knees. "Is it not literature?" said Steerpike. "Is he not a great lover of books?" They nodded. "He is very clever," said Cora. "But he reads it all in books," said Clarice. "Exactly." Steerpike followed quickly upon this. "Then if he lost his books, he would be all but defeated. If the centre of his life were destroyed, he would be but a shell. As I see it, your ladyships, it is at this library that our first thrust must be directed. You must have your rights," he added hotly. "It is only fair that you should have your rights." He took a dramatic step towards the Lady Cora Groan. He raised his voice. "My Lady Cora Groan, do you not agree?" Cora, who had been sitting on the extreme edge of her chair in her excitement, now rose and nodded her head so violently as to throw her hair into confusion. Clarice, on being asked, followed her sister's example, and Steerpike relit his pipe from the fire and leaned against the mantelpiece for a few moments, sending out wreaths of smoke from between his thin lips. "You have helped me a great deal, your ladyships," he said at last, drawing at his stubby pipe and watching a smoke ring float to the ceiling. "You are prepared, I am sure, for the sake of your own honour, to assist me further in my struggle for your deliverance." He understood from the movements of their perched bodies that they agreed that this was so. "The question that arises in that case," said Steerpike, "is how are we to dispose of your brother's books and thereby bring home to him his responsibilities? What do you feel is the obvious method of destroying a library full of books? Have you been to his library lately, your ladyships?" They shook their heads. "How would you proceed, Lady Cora? What method would you use to destroy 100,000 books?" Steerpike removed his pipe from his lips and gazed intently at her. "I'd burn them," said Cora. This was exactly what Steerpike had wanted her to say, but he shook his head. "Oh, that would be difficult. What could we burn it with?" "With fire," said Clarisse. "But how would we start the fire, Lady Clarisse?" said Steerpike, pretending to look perplexed. "Straw," said Cora. "That is a possibility," said Steerpike, stroking his chin. "I wonder if your idea would work swiftly enough. Do you think it would?" "Yes, yes," said Clarisse. "Straw is lovely to burn." "But would it catch the books?" persisted Steerpike. "All on its own? There would have to be a great deal of it. Would it be quick enough?" "What's the hurry?" said Cora. "It must be done swiftly," said Steerpike. "Otherwise the flames might be put out by busybodies." "I love fires," said Clarisse. "But we oughtn't to burn down Sepulchre's library, ought we?" Steerpike had expected, sooner or later, that one of them would feel conscience-stricken, and he had retained his trump card. "Lady Cora," he said, "sometimes one has to do things which are unpalatable. When great issues are involved, one can't toy with the situation in silk gloves. No, we are making history, and we must be stalwart. Do you recall how when I first came in I told you that I had received information? Do you? Well, I will now divulge what has come to my ears. Keep calm and steady. Remember who you are. I shall look after your interests. Have no fear. But at this moment, sit down, will you, and attend. You tell me you have been treated badly for this and for that, but only listen now to the latest scandal that is being repeated below stairs. They aren't being asked. Everyone is saying they haven't been asked." "Asked what?" said Clarisse. "Or where?" said Cora. "To the great gathering which your brother is calling. At this great gathering the details for a party for the new heir to Gormenghast, your nephew Titus, will be discussed. Everyone of importance is going. Even the prune scholars are going. It is the first time for many years that your brother has become so worldly as to call the members of his family together. He has, it is said, many things which he wishes to talk of in connection with Titus, and in my opinion this great gathering in a week's time will be of prime importance. No one knows exactly what Lord Sepulchrave has in mind, but the general idea is that preparations must be begun even now for a party on his son's first birthday. Whether you will even be invited to that party I would not like to say, but judging from the remarks I have heard about how you two have been thrust aside and forgotten like old shoes, I should say it was very unlikely." "You see," said Steerpike, "I have not been idle. I have been listening and taking stock of the situation, and one day my labours will prove themselves to have been justified. When I see you, my dear ladyships, sitting at either end of a table of distinguished guests, and when I hear the glasses clinking and the rounds of applause that greet your every remark, I shall congratulate myself that I have long ago enough imagination and ruthless realism to proceed with the dangerous work of raising you two to the level at which you belong." "Why should you not have been invited to the party?" "Why? Why? Who are you to be spurned thus and derided by the lowest menials in Swelter's kitchen?" Steerpike paused and saw that his words had produced a great effect. Clarisse had gone over to Cora's chair, where now they both sat bolt upright and very close together. "When you suggested so perspicaciously just now that the solution to this insufferable state of affairs lay in the destruction of your brother's cumbersome library, I felt that you were right, and that only through a brave action of that kind might you be able to lift up your heads once more and feel the slur removed from your escutcheon. That idea of yours spelt genius. I appeal to your ladyships to do what you feel to be consistent with your honour and your pride. You are not old, your ladyships. Oh, no, you are not old. But are you young? I should like to feel that what years you have left will be filled with glamorous days and romantic nights. Shall it be so? Shall we take the step towards justice? Yes or no, my dear ladyships? Yes or no?" They got up together. "Yes," they said. "We want power back. We want our servants back, and justice back, and everything back," Cora said slowly, a counterpoint of intense excitement weaving through the flat foreground of her voice. "And romantic nights," said Clarisse. "I'd like that. Yes, yes. Burn, burn," she continued loudly, her flat bosom beginning to heave up and down like a machine. "Burn, burn, burn." "When?" said Cora. "When can we burn it up?" Steerpike held up his hand to quieten them, but they took no notice, only leaning forward, holding each other's hands and crying in their dreadful, emotionless voices, "Burn, burn, 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 burn," until they had exhausted themselves. Steerpike had not flinched under his ordeal. He now realized more completely than before why they were ostracized from the normal activities of the castle. He had known they were slow, but he had not known that they would behave like this. He changed his tone. "Sit down!" he rapped out. "Both of you, sit down!" They complied at once, and although they were taken aback at the peremptory nature of his order, he could see that he now had complete control over them. And though his inclination was to show his authority and to taste for the first time the sinister delights of his power, yet he spoke to them gently. For, first of all, the library must be burned for a reason of his own. After that, with such a dreadful hold over them, he could relax for a time and enjoy a delicious dictatorship in the south wing. "In 6 days' time, your ladyships," he said, fingering his gold chain, "on the evening before the great gathering to which you have not been invited, the library will be empty, and you may burn it to the ground. I shall prepare the incendiaries and will school you in all the details later. But on the great night itself, when you see me give the signal, you will set fire at once to the fuel and will make your way immediately to this room." "Can't we watch it burn?" said Cora. "Yes," said Clarisse. "Can't we?" "From your tree," said Steerpike. "Do you want to be found out?" "No," they said. "No, no." "Then you can watch it from your tree and be quite safe. I will remain in the woods so that I can see that nothing goes wrong. Do you understand?" "Yes," they said. "Then we'll have power, won't we?" The unconscious irony of this caused Steerpike's lip to lift, but he said, "Your ladyships will then have power," and approaching them he turned and kissed the tips of their fingers. Picking up his sword-stick from the table, he walked swiftly to the door, where he bowed. Before he opened it, he said, "We are the only ones who know. The only ones who will ever know. Aren't we?" "Yes," they said. "Only us." "I will return within a day or two," said Steerpike, "and give you the details. Your honour must be saved." He did not say good night, but opened the door and disappeared into the darkness.